Twilight is a 2005 young adult romance novel written by Stephanie Meyer. The story follows teenager Bella Swan as she moves to a new town, meets a vampire, and then falls madly in love with said vampire. The novel inspired 3 sequels and a series of film adaptations. But that's not the only Twilight content out there. Set for release this August is Midnight Sun, a retelling of Twilight from Edward's perspective. A book Meyer had actually been working on closer to the release of the original books and films. She scrapped the project, though, after some of her test chapters were leaked. It seems that at some point she decided to revisit the project, and it's finally getting off the ground. Aside from that, though, there is one other Twilight book. See, back in 2015, for the 10th anniversary of Twilight, Stephanie Meyer released Life and Death, Twilight Reimagined. This is a version of Twilight in which the genders of all of the main characters have been switched. That's right, Bella is now a boy and Edward is a sexy vampire lady. So, let's talk about that. Douglas, interrupt us. There we go. Good boy. Before we get into the meat of the review, I feel like it's worth mentioning that I actually liked Twilight when I first read it. In my defense, it had only been out for a year and I was 16. At that point, no one really hated it because the only people reading it were teenage girls. You know, the target demographic. And these girls either really loved romance novels or really liked vampires. I happened to be one of the teenage girls who was absolutely obsessed with vampires, and I unapologetically loved the first Twilight book. Then New Moon came out and ruined everything. I hated the book and really only finished it because my friends made me. Then they made me read Eclipse, and I honestly do not remember anything that happened in that book. On the bright side, all of my friends hated Breaking Dawn, so I got out of reading that one. At some point between me reading and forgetting everything that happened in Eclipse and all of my friends deciding that, Breaking Dawn was the worst book on the planet, the first Twilight movie came out. I saw it in theaters and I liked it. Probably because the book it was based on was the only one I actually liked in the entire series. I think a big part of why I liked the first Twilight book and movie is because I was a teenager when I first encountered them. It appeals to all of the emotions lonely teenage girls feel when they're trying to figure themselves out and find their place in the world. Nothing outside of Bella's emotions matter in Twilight. So if you're not a teenage girl, you're not going to connect with the story. Twilight is a story about a teenage girl's feelings. Sure, there are vampires, but the story is not actually about them. You could make Edward just a normal, angst-ridden teenage boy, and it would play out almost exactly the same way. That's because the story is just about a teenager who gets a crush on someone who they don't really know at all. It happens all the time in real life. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't anything wrong with the first Twilight novel. You can criticize it to hell and back if you want. I'm not going to stop you. What I'm saying is that Twilight, as a standalone, without the rest of the series, is a serviceable romance novel. It's a fun way to waste an afternoon or two if you're in the mood for a story with low mental commitment. And it's honestly not any more problematic than anything Jude Devereaux has written. And she's a best-selling author. So, now you know that I liked Twilight as a teenager. Despite this, I did in fact miss the release of this reimagined Twilight. Entirely because it was 10 years later and I was very much not a teenager anymore, and I did not care at all. I had moved past Twilight and didn't even have the energy to hate it like everyone else did. Then, not too long ago, Amanda the Jedi did a video about this book, and I knew I had to read it. As I worked my way through this book, I actually had fewer regrets than I was expecting. I obviously didn't care about anything that was going on because I'm not 16 anymore, but it wasn't horrendous. It was just boring. And then I got to the ending. Alright, most of this book is just copy and pasted from the original Twilight novel, except Bella is now a boy named Beaufort, or Beau, And Edward is a girl named Edith, spelled with a Y for the sole purpose of driving me insane the entire time. Listen, quick sidebar. I don't think that was a common variant of the name in early 1900 Chicago, which is where Edith Edward is from, I guess. It's just a little annoying thing that took me out of the narrative every time it came up, and her name is said so often it hurts. Admittedly though, while I am a historian, my area of study is not early 1900 Chicago, so I could absolutely be wrong about this, but it did bother me the entire time. There are only two, I guess, major changes in this novel compared to the original. At some point in Twilight, Bella almost gets assaulted, but in the nick of time, Edward swoops in and saves her. Which is really uncomfortable, but not that unusual for romance novels. That doesn't happen to Beau, though. Instead, he stumbles upon a gang that accuse him of being a cop because they saw him with Charlie earlier. So they decided they're going to murder him. Just before they get the chance, though, Edith swoops in and saves the day, just like Edward did with Bella. The other thing is the ending, which we'll get to, but first, let's talk about the characters. Despite my problems with Edith's name, I actually really liked her as a character, which is saying a lot because Edward was my least favorite character in all of the original Twilight novels. Yes, I was Team Jacob. He was done dirty by the narrative, and I refused to accept anything that happened to him as fact, except the werewolf thing, because that was kind of cool. Edward was creepy, and he didn't really seem to care about Bella's feelings outside of how they affected him. He gets really angry, and he takes it out on her a lot, which is really uncomfortable when you grow up and start to look back on the series. Early on in Twilight, Edward is really aggressive towards Bella to try and scare her away. I remember this coming off as actively threatening. And if a man did that to me or anyone I know in real life, I would absolutely have stayed away. Maybe even have called 911 on them, let the authorities deal with him. Heck, Bella's dad is the local sheriff. If I'd been her, I absolutely would have told Charlie. I'm also paranoid, so, there's that. When Edith tries to scare off Beau, it doesn't come off nearly as threatening. I think Meyer intentionally had Edith be less aggressive towards Beau. Also, there's stereotypical gender role nonsense going on. Edith is a small and frail-looking girl, and even after Beau finds out she's a vampire and sees what she can do, he has a hard time of seeing her as anything other than delicate. So she's not actively threatening Beau, and because he's the narrator and doesn't perceive her as threatening at any point, we don't perceive her as threatening at any point. In general, all of her actions just seem less extreme than Edward's, which makes her a much more enjoyable character than Edward. I understand why Beau is into Edith. I don't really understand why Bella is into Edward. Although, she still does the thing. She breaks into his house to watch him sleep, even before they get together. I hate this. I think everyone hates this. The thing is that it's not actually that weird for the genre. Bullshit like this happens all of the time in romance novels, and it's supposed to be romantic, and I can't. I just can't. Why? This is why I gave up reading romance novels. And this is literally the only thing about the first Twilight book that I hate. Alright. Now that that's out of my system, let's talk about Beau. Honestly, if it weren't for the fact that he's vampire catnip, I'd wonder why Edith liked him. He's really just boring, and he doesn't feel like an actual teenage boy. Now, I was never a teenage boy, so I don't understand the inner machinations of teenage boys. But I have worked with a lot of teenage boys, and my nephew is still technically a teenager. Therefore, he is a teenage boy, and for the most part, I understand him. At least the parts of him he shares with the rest of us. I feel like any of the teenage boys I've known wouldn't be all that worried about the strange girl hating them. They at least wouldn't immediately obsess over it on their first day of school in a new town in a drastically different climate than what they were used to. I mean, I also have lived my entire life in a desert and have no idea how to deal with snow, so that would definitely concern me more than the standoffish hot kid in the cafeteria. And listen, Bo claims to be really concerned about his mom's ability to take care of herself. Despite the fact that she was the adult, he was the one who took responsibility for everything. He made dinner, he fixed things around the house, and he even made sure the bills were paid on time. His concerns and internal panic over her should probably be more important than, oh my god, that hot chick hates me. What do I do? How do I make her like me? I get this is a cheesy romance novel that happens to have vampires in it, but it just comes off as inauthentic. Bo doesn't seem to have strong feelings about anything other than how pretty Edith is, which makes him very uninteresting as a character. Even when we get together, he spends most of the time waxing poetic about her appearance, which is aggravating. Like, she plays piano. Can you talk about how great you think that is? While we're talking about characters, I feel like I should mention that Jacob is Julie now, and she really just exists to move the plot along. She's just there to drop hints about vampires, which admittedly is not much different than what Jacob did in the first novel. That doesn't change the fact that she was an absolute bright spot in all of this. I was trudging through all of the teen romance drama, wondering why I had decided to do this to myself when Julie finally showed up. Not only did she move the story along, but she was significantly more interesting than any of Bo's friends. She was cute, she was charming, and I loved her. It is a fact, though, that Charlie is the best character in any of these books, and he gets absolutely shafted. He might not understand his child in any version, but he tries. And he really does care for his kid and wants what's best for them. He's really the only character who is consistently good, and I feel really bad for him, especially in this version. Okay, so the thing I hate the most about this book is the ending. There are a couple of changes here and there, but for the most part, it's just a copy and pasted version of the original Twilight until the very end. It starts like the original Twilight. Bo goes with the Cullens to play baseball. While they're out, they run into an outside group of vampires. These vampires feed off of humans, and one of them decides that they really want to eat Bo. So everybody freaks out and tries to get Bo to safety. To increase his odds of survival, Bo has to leave town. He goes home, grabs his stuff, and says some really terrible things to his dad, which Bella also does in the original. The difference is that Bella at the end of Twilight goes home and works things out with Charlie. Bo never makes it home. At the end of Twilight, Edward has to keep Bella from turning into a vampire. She gets bitten in the final fight by the vampire that had been trying to kill her, and this means that there's now vampire venom flowing through her. So Edward has to suck it out, like they say you should do for snake bites in movies. The same thing happens to Bo in this version, except Edith can't suck it out. Bo becomes a vampire. He becomes a vampire, and he never gets to see his mom and dad ever again. He's literally dead to the world. There's even a funeral. A funeral in which you see how absolutely devastated Charlie and his mom are, and I hate it. For a boy who spent so much of the novel saying he was worried about his mom, he sure doesn't give a shit about her or her emotional well-being. Bo is my new least favorite character. That's not the worst of it, though. Between when everyone realizes that they can't save Bo and the last page is nothing but a giant info dump. Throughout the Twilight series, you find out that there's a secret underground vampire mafia in Italy that controls everything. In Life and Deathy, we get a speed run of their entire history. It feels more like an outline for a future novel than like it's actually part of this story. There's also an epilogue where we find out about the werewolves, and they pretty much just show up to have a standoff with the Cullens because they turned Bo and broke the treaty. So Bo has a talk with them, and that's it. That's it. That's the end. And I hate it so much This book is also following me. I went to Target the day after I finished it and found copies of it just hanging out on the shelf, mocking me. This book is also physically a lot shorter than I thought. The copy I was reading was an ebook I got from my library, and I felt like I was never going to reach the end. I was so bored out of my mind that while I was reading this, that I would periodically go and check the little status bar at the bottom that said how far you are, and be even more frustrated because I was only on page like 200 out of 3,000. Seeing how short the physical copy of this book is extra frustrating. It's such a short book. Why did it take me a week and a half to get through it? Why, when you're reading it, does it feel like it's so much longer than it actually is? I don't remember the original Twilight being this frustrating when I read it the first time, and it's twice as long. What the hell is in Twilight to make it so long? It doesn't feel like anything is missing from Life and Death, so Twilight must have been absolutely padded with unimportant, forgettable things. Life and Death is Twilight without the padding, and it's still boring. Was the padding what made it fun? I'm gonna have to reread it, aren't I? Being 16 really did a lot to help the story go down. It is rough going when you're an adult. Long story short, this book is just really boring, and the ending is aggravating. It's not really worth the effort I put into it, and I can't believe I pre-ordered Midnight Sun. That's right, I pre-ordered Midnight Sun pretty much the second I found out about it, so if you'd like to see me review that book, stay tuned. It's gonna be a great time for everyone but me. Real weird side thing that bothered me the entire time I was reading, not the side thing that bothered me while I was reading this book. At some point, Charlie, early on, Charlie buys Beau an old truck off of one of his old friends, and it was one of those solid iron monsters that never gets damaged, the kind you see at the scene of an accident, paint unscratched, surrounded by pieces of the foreign car it had just destroyed, as if like that behemoth is good. That's a good thing. Okay, listen, modern cars sort of crumple and disintegrate in accidents because they are absorbing, like, the force of the impact so you don't die. This truck, if you get in an accident with it, you're probably going to not live. Just saying. Like, that bugged me. That bugged me.